Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Welcome to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast with your usual host, Federico Plantera, journalist, sociologist, and researcher. Today, with a guest from Costa Rica, a guest that is Paula Bogantes Zamora, Minister of Science, Innovation, Technology, and Telecommunications, indeed, at the Costa Rica government. So, Paula, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor for me to be here with you.
It's an honor for us as well because we have already seen you at the latest e-governance conference 2024, participating in the panel on switching on enlightened leadership. And what we're going to do today is exactly to speak about the status, but also the decisions basically that have been taken already in the past in terms of digital transformation. And at the same time, budget reapportioning and focus points in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is not really new on the map for us and also for our listeners because in a few of the past seasons, let's say, of the past few years of the Digital Government Podcast, we have already covered developments in Costa Rica regarding especially cybersecurity. Today, instead, I would start basically from the very basis, and so to ask you, what is the status at the moment, in your view, of digital transformation in Costa Rica, and also how does it feel or reflect in everyday life or in everyday life doing business?
That's a very good question. What's the status of Costa Rican digital transformation? It depends on who do we compare ourselves with, right? If we were to look at the region, and by region I mean, let's say Central America, we are, according to different ranks, the number one country when it comes to digital transformation. If we compare ourselves with Europe, I'm going to say we're lagging behind. Asia, same thing. But internally, how is the digital transformation? We've done progress, important progress when talking about regulatory bills, for example. We have a data protection. We're in the process of approving a cybersecurity. We have already put out a strategy for digital transformation for cybersecurity. We're working on AI, etc. We also have different initiatives that are being pushed by different ministries, not just the ministry I represent, but, for example, the Ministry of Transportation. They're working on a digital driver license. We also have it's not called the elections agency, but it's the agency in charge they're the ones that issue our ID. Every Costa Rican that's born, they're the ones that assign an ID number. They're working on the digital ID for each Costa Ricans. We are working on a digital wallet, on digital signatures already out in Costa Rica. So we're doing campaigns for people to implement digital wallet more, even from a central government. We're enhancing, or not enhancing, but working with our colleagues to make sure that we are paper-free, for example, something that Estonia did a number of years ago. So again, in a nutshell, what we see is that you have to, this is, I would say, mandatory for governments to work on a digital transformation strategy. We see it, we see the benefits, we see the savings that represents, but more so than savings, I think it's a duty, it's a mandate for governments to make sure that their services are the citizens have more access to them. And by access, I mean not having citizens to go to seek for a service at an institution, but rather log in and ask for a healthcare appointment, ask for a driver license appointment, all those services that now Costa Ricans have to literally move from their house or work to the institutions to have those more accessible to them.
You said it depends who do we compare it to or with, but would you say that it also depends maybe a little bit who do you ask this question to? What do I mean with this is, do you see maybe that there has been, or like what has been, let's say, the trend in the latest years, let's say, in terms of what are the focus points and the focus groups and the focus services or policy domains where Costa Rica and the Costa Rican governments and policymakers have thought, okay, this is a priority area now that we need to tackle and we need to make more digital. Now there is this one. Now there is this one. How did that go in the most recent times?
That's a very good question. And I'm going to say, in order for a government to kickstart the digital transformation, it is necessary to have the support, I'm going to say, of the president or prime minister of that country. Without his or her support, it's going to be harder for, I'm going to say, the Ministry of Science and Technology, the short name for MISIT, to move forward with this digital transformation. And why do I say that? Always the kickstart is the hardest. Once you kick the ball, then it's easier to continue with this, right, action. So what happened in the past was that the focus of the government was not necessarily on technology, but rather education, security, infrastructure, not so much, but other topics, right? What happened now is the current president of Costa Rica realizes the importance of technology. What does that represent, again, for citizens? As I said, what does that represent for savings? I also want to say that we suffer a pretty hard cybersecurity attack in 2022, right? And that put technology on the table, right? The focus was on, well, what happened? We don't have an army, so we are not a military threat to no one. We never imagined our wildest dream that another nation was going to attack us, because cybersecurity was not even in our state of mind. So cybersecurity helped us. The positive of what happened was that it put technology on the table. And I'm going to say AI is also pushing that topic worldwide. So there's a combination of different factors now where governments they'll be foolish if they don't sit down and say, we have to digital transform our government. We have to be more efficient, right? We have to leverage from technology for all the benefits that technology brings to citizens. And also, let's make sure that it is secure. And as I said, we have great examples from Europe. Estonia is a great example. Portugal is another great example. We have great examples in Asia. So again, governments will be foolish if we don't see what other countries are doing, how they did it, the benefits that it's providing, and then just copy. I like to say tropicalize it, right? Estonia has a way. We have to bring it to Costa Rica, tropicalize it, make it more Latino, if you will, and implement those actions.
Yeah, because you mentioned defense and... to put things in context for a moment, like in the general public discourse, let's say that at the very like high and like state level, let's say it's happening in the, I feel at least that it's happening in the world at the moment. There is obviously due to current affairs and like what has been happening in the world lately with different tensions, not only in Eastern Europe exactly with the war in Ukraine and Russia's aggression, but also in the Middle East and in other areas of the world, then obviously it comes even as more interesting the fact that the already famous, let's say, decision of Costa Rica not to not have an army, like maybe could potentially, according to some, come a little bit under scrutiny, no? And like a little bit revalued. But what happened in Costa Rica in that sense is that the defense, the public expenditure, let's say, and the public commitment into defense basically has been redirected towards digitalization. But in that sense, what practically, what is the impact, let's say, of that decision, and what did Costa Rica do? What were also like the driving motives, the reasoning behind it?
So the decision to not have an army was made in 1948. Now, people need to understand that we are a very small economy. Right now, we only have 5.2 million inhabitants. We're one of the smallest countries in Central America. So back in 1948, we had someone would call a civil, not even a war, but, you know, some...
tensions
yes,
in the society.
Tensions.
Let's say. Conflict,
right,
social unrest.
Yes, there you go. And Costa Ricans were, some Costa Ricans died, and that, you know, we're people of peace. Back then, the presidents and the government leaders, they decided that it wasn't worth it. It was money not well spent, I'm going to say. And in 1948, we decided not to have an army. And as you said, the money that was being used for military purposes was refocused on education and health. And I do think that that was a very smart decision. But once again, we have to take into account that we've never had a conflict with Panama. We've been very lucky, right? So in Nicaragua, there's some tensions. We still have some tensions, but overall, it's been a very amicable relationship between both of our bordering countries. So then pandemia came. And I'm going to say the pandemia, one of the good lessons, there's always a good and a bad for every situation, right? And the pandemia showed us that we had made the right decision when we said spending on education and health, because we were one of the countries that was very successful with the pandemia campaigns and pandemia vaccination and all that stuff. So now what comes next? We used these, since 2017, Costa Rica has been digitalizing every Costa Rican has now a digital healthcare file since 2017. And that's huge, right? There's a number of countries, they don't even have that. So when pandemia came, we were able to identify how many Costa Ricans we had, that senior Costa Ricans. That was the first vaccination campaign was targeted to them.
So risk groups based on an electronic health record, basically.
Right. But not only we were able to know how many when buying vaccinations, but where did they live? We were able, through campaigns, to tell these senior citizens, come and get the shots at different locations. But the ones that were not coming, they were actually, healthcare officials were going over to their house because that was part of their digital file. And then we focused to other different population groups when talking about vaccinations. So that helped us also realize how important it is to digitalize everything, right? Again, we can see the examples of other countries, but using Costa Rica's example. So now we need to move into the next stage, which is how do we, for example, work on interoperability? How do we connect the information that private hospitals have with this digital file that we have? Because that only includes the public healthcare system in Costa Rica. We have a universal healthcare system, so everybody gets services for free. But we have the private sector, and we have to connect them too. We have to make sure, from a government point of view, the more data you have, the better public policies you can work on, the better campaigns, the better usage of money, for example, when buying medicines. We have Costa Rica is one of the countries that has a very high diabetes population.
I didn't know.
Yes. So how do we tackle diabetes, right? How do we tackle different types of cancer? Stomach cancer is another one that is present in Costa Rica. So again, data is power. And governments will be foolish, again, let me use that word, if we don't digitalize all the government services for us to then look at the data and be more efficient when providing services, when with the usage of the government's money or taxpayers' money.
No, but I like the use of the word foolish because semantically, in any case, transmits really like the sense of urgency, but at the same time, the gravity, the importance, and the relevance of exactly leveraging actually in practice the power of data, which is obviously like a topic that now in terms of like, let's say, housekeeping the information system, housekeeping and keeping tidy, let's say at the same time, all the registers and registries that the public administration has becomes of utmost importance when you actually have even more tools to analyze this data and derive not just trends, but at the same time, actionable policies that are based on the trends that you are identifying. And since you spoke already of the topic of interoperability and next things to do, no, on the list, let's say. So what are basically Costa Rica's digital transformation goals, let's say? So talking about goals, like objectives at the higher level, because, for example, something that you have mentioned already and that I think we could connect to the aspect of interoperability is that just in introduction to this episode, you were mentioning how in Costa Rica there are different digital solutions that allow people to identify and authenticate themselves in order to access services, no? Is there maybe like a plan to reconcile at some point all of these identities in, I don't know, a wallet, for example? But this is just one aspect, because overall, exactly, what are the Costa Rica's digital transformation goals for at least the near future?
That's a very good question. So we are working on a digital ID. We're working on a digital driver license that will be part of the digital wallet. The digital wallet will also include the digital healthcare ID, which is the one that we already have. So that those three alone will move us into the next stage, right? And then the digital ID will connect to many other services, right? We're working on interoperability, as you said. We have the digital signature already. We have to make sure that more Costa Ricans use the digital signature. We're moving into paper zero within the central government. We have to make sure that we are more. Remember, Costa Rica is also world known for its environment policies. So it's contradictory to say that we're very keen and very proud of how we protect our environment, where 99% of our electricity is generated through renewable sources. That's another thing that we brag on. Not many countries can say that, right?
You have full rights to do so.
Right, right. So it only makes sense that we are paper free, right? It goes along with this environment policy and ideology that we have. So those are some of the actions we're working on, just essentially to digitalize the central government, its services. Another benefit that I haven't mentioned that this brings, and this is something that we've learned from Estonia, is transparency. Remember that Latin America many countries have been shadowed by a corruption within government, right? Luckily, Costa Rica doesn't belong to those countries. But if you ask Costa Ricans, they will say corruption is a problem that we wish we didn't have. So technology also helps governments be more transparent, for the citizens to know exactly why a decision was made. Again, data is available, how we're not hiding anything. Estonians say, and I love, the something that I've heard throughout my stay in Estonia, you can bribe or try to bribe a person, but you cannot bribe a computer or a technological solution. So that's a machine, right? So we need to move towards that transparency, and technology certainly help us do that.
Yeah, and obviously that, at least in the key nodes, let's say, of the public administration, where processes, let's say, have to pass by, let's say, but one thing that I would, since you have mentioned, for example, corruption, but also like the topic of this environmental sensitivity that there is in Costa Rica, we're talking about two pressing challenges that do not belong, let's say, or are not based solely on Costa Rica, or that solely Costa Rica has to solve. Instead, if we were to take for a moment exactly if we were to take for a moment the point of view of you as a minister and your ministry, what are instead, in your opinion, some of the main challenges, let's say, that you have encountered so far, or that you see coming your way in the very near future, and obviously on the path towards improving, implementing, and enhancing digital transformation in the country? And in relation to that, how do you plan to solve them?
That's another good question. And I'm going to say the number one problem that I can identify right now is the resistance to change, right? The status quo. Everybody wants to stay within their comfort zone. I've been doing this way for X many years. Why would I change? So one of the biggest problems we have is to make sure that within government, and I'm pretty sure that this also happens with the private industry, but they have different ways to tackle that. But within the government, how do we make sure that the middle management, the employees of those institutions that are in charge of making sure that those changes happen, that they don't give us resistance? How do we do that? With training sessions, with showing them examples of how other countries have done it and the benefits that they see. Again, I think if you were to ask me, that's number one, the resistance that we're facing from government employees. The other one is the framework. Any change, digital transformation change, needs to be supported or reinforced with a framework, with a bill, right? And that then Parliament comes into play. And it's a separate power from the executive power, which is where I'm part of, right? So working with Parliament, it shouldn't be this complicated. And again, I use the example of some European countries where they pass bills in a matter of months and whatnot. It's not the case of Costa Rica.
No?
No, we have a huge challenge there because then it becomes very political. And what one party wants to do I think that at the end of the day, what's best for the country should always prevail. Unfortunately, when talking about the political game, that doesn't always necessarily happen.
But very interesting, these 2 points, because they relate to something that also personally, I'm originally from Italy, and obviously when I came to Estonia and I started working and living in Estonia, and especially getting into the topic of digital policy and digital transformation and the path that Estonia took in terms of digital transformation, these two aspects have always been highlighted with the utmost importance. The first, exactly the point of the quote-unquote, let's say, the enemy within. There is this expression in English, but it's exactly on not seeing people who present resistances, let's say, to change as indeed something that you have to remove or get rid of, which is, you mentioned the private sector, and you said they have other ways to do this. I know, like, organizational change in the private sector, also in terms of like employment rules and regulations, could be easier to bring about in this non-collaborative, not that much collaborative way, let's say. While instead in the public sector, it's instead about getting people on board, and especially getting on board the people also that you already have within the public sector as well, because they know all the inner workings of the administrative machinery, let's say, let's put it this way. But second, also, something that I remember was highlighted as well on stage at the e-governance conference was the fact that the importance of political support, because there is a shared understanding, almost as a basis, almost as a baseline understanding that digital, that you can't really like fight digital as a topic in itself, but you have to understand how to configure it in a way that serves the citizens in the best way possible, and that at the same time makes government work in an easier and more efficient way, essentially, which cuts across the spectrum of political parties that at the moment are in government, but that maybe tomorrow are not in government anymore. And it's some change that instead has to be lasting change and to be brought about, as actually also the title of the section of the session that you participated in, by enlightened leadership in that sense. So you have referenced a few European countries and also some things that you as well on this line have heard, let's say, in Estonia during your days here. So one thing that I would ask you about it is there maybe some, like, what do you consider as inspiring, let's say, stories or dynamics maybe that, not that you look up to, but that you look towards and think, okay, you said copy before, but then instead you would think, let's tropicalize this. What are some of the things that maybe you saw or like you've heard about that you think, this let's make a Latino version of this, as you said.
Well, I'll use the example of Estonia. The fact that they pass bills in a matter of months, the fact that they include the citizens' opinion for certain aspects that have to do with the whole country, right? They do polls, right? And if the majority of the citizens think that the parliament should work on a specific law, then that topic is brought to parliament. That's great. We don't have that in Costa Rica. The fact that They don't. 99% of the government services have been digitalized in Estonia. That's insane. Only divorce, and I think that it should be kept more like a face-to-face final signature sort of thing. So that's great, right? The savings that represents for the government. I'll use another example. We are getting a lot of help from Portugal, and I'm going to say it's a two-way help, right? Or we're both learning from each other. Portugal, and why do I like to use Estonia and Portugal? Estonia made the great decision back in the 90s to digitalize everything. So they didn't have to move much from paper to digital. They started digital, which is amazing. We, on the other hand, have the challenge of moving from paper to digital. So we look at Portugal too, because they went through the same process. And again, that's where resistance come into play a lot, right? Portugal is doing great. They have a digital wallet, digital citizen, digital healthcare service, everything that we are moving towards, right? Now they came to Costa Rica and they looked at everything that we've done with the digital healthcare file. And they said, well, you guys have things that we don't have. So again, we're learning from each other. But Portugal is another great example. I'll use another example from Asia, South Korea. South Korea is amazing. If you look at the story of South Korea, they've done great advances on their economy. They're a great player right now.
Absolutely.
Where many decades ago they weren't. So South Korea is also another example that Costa Rica is looking at. I'm going to say we've done a great job at keeping a stable economy, at being world known for our peace, for our democracy is one of the long-standing democracies in the world, for having a very educated population, for being very good at attracting foreign direct investment. We have companies of the likes of Microsoft and the Amazon and the Intels with huge operations in Costa Rica, very sophisticated. But I think Costa Rica right now is at a moment in time where we need to move to the next step. And the next step definitely includes technology. The challenge that we have, and I'm going to say this is probably good for many countries that are at the same stage of Costa Rica, is technology. Technology is a big word that not many people understand the ins and outs of technology, right? I'll give you an example of Costa Rica. My ministry, or the ministry that I represent, is the smallest ministry when talking about people and budget. And you will say, with the important role that technology now plays in our lives, it shouldn't be that way. We have a ministry that focuses on technology. There are other Latin American countries, they don't even have a ministry that focuses on technology. During this administration, we managed to get a 52% increment on our budget. That's how committed we are, and more staff. So again, I think we're in the right track. I think what Costa Rica, this administration needs to do is make sure that we digital transform one industry, and we're focusing on a healthcare. And why are we doing that? Because we can talk about interoperability all day long, and the regular citizen from Costa Rica will not understand. Maybe Estonians, yes, because they've seen the benefit, but not Costa Ricans. So we said, let's choose an industry that will bring benefits to Costa Rican right away, and something that touches their heart. Health is one of them, right? So I would say, my hope is that as soon as we manage to show Costa Ricans what interoperability is all about with the healthcare system, the next digital transformation of the next industry, education, employment, whatever that may be, is going to be easier because you prove your case already. So that's what we're focusing on right now.
Of course. And actually, with this, we're already at the last question of this podcast episode. Super interesting. And Paula, thanks a lot for this overview that first of all, that you gave me, and then also through me also to all our listeners. And you mentioned collaboration with other countries, not just in terms of drawing inspiration from something that they have done already, but also in terms of doing things together with them and to have this two-way relationship, no? Like where there is an exchange of knowledge, best practices. You mentioned Portugal, but I know also that there is a collaboration going on with the EU LAC project with the Estonian government and actually also e-governance academy itself. Could you tell us a bit more about this project to close this episode, and at the same time maybe share with us some plans or what Costa Rica finds particularly interesting within the scope of this project in Estonia's story of digital development? Because you have already mentioned quite a few examples and things that you've heard exactly during the time in Estonia. So let's delimit it a little more within the scope of this collaboration.
So we are launching interoperability using X-Road, which is the software developed by the Estonian, I don't know if it was the Estonian government, right? They're giving us all the assistance to make sure that we do it right using X-Road. So the collaboration has to do with that. They're going to help us put together the architecture of the digitalisation of the government using X-Road. We're giving them the plan for the digital healthcare. So they're going to help us make sure that when we do the interoperability with with the healthcare industry, that it's done right. And then we can move to different areas. We're talking about the digital wallet that we are developing, but eventually we're going to have to also make it so it interoperates with other, as I said, the digital ID, the digital driver license, the digital healthcare ID. So again, Estonia what they're doing is helping us make sure that we use best practices, that we don't make foolish mistakes. And I say foolish for them, maybe not for us, right?
No, but also to keep with the same semantics of the foolishness in digital transformation that instead has to be, done consciously and with awareness.
Yes. And another very important aspect is we can be an example to follow for the region. And Estonia sees the benefit, the EU sees the benefit, and we certainly see the benefit. We will be more than happy to help neighboring countries to also work along the path of their digital transformation. I think that it's again foolish for us to pretend just to have this action being done in Costa Rica and not leverage from the neighboring countries. Central America is our second largest commerce partner, right? The U.S. is number one, Central America is another one. So imagine what the EU is trying to do right now with the digital ID that can be used across the European countries. We need to do the same in Latin America. Let's start with Central America. So Estonia is helping us do the digital transformation, and the goal is then for Costa Rica to be used as an example for the rest of the countries in the region to do the same.
And help bring about, essentially, also in that region, a digital single market in the way that at least has been laid out or planned out, as it works as well in the European Union, with the effects that it has, and with the cooperation also that is fostering between countries within Europe, for example. Paola Bogantes, thanks a lot for joining us in this podcast episode.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
And thanks a lot also to all our listeners for tuning in to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast. That's it also from your host, Federico Plantera, at least for today. Tune in the next episode, and I can only wish you to have a good one.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.